Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I am so excited for today's episode with a returning guest because I feel like right now, especially, all of us could dig into how to cultivate some more contentment or Santosha. If you know the Sanskrit word that relates to contentment, all of us can benefit from focusing on cultivating contentment. If you are new here, let me introduce myself in the podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. This podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people who were here on Turtle Island long before my settler ancestors arrived. I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, a mom of 3, an entrepreneur, and a forever student who loves to ask so many questions. And I feel like that's maybe why podcasting is a good fit. You know, it's almost been 7.5 years of podcasting. And I am just so grateful that we get to hang out together here and learn together. This podcast was made for you, the yoga teacher, because I get how it feels to be out in the real world as a yoga teacher. When you first leave that yoga teacher training, that initial one, and then also through the bumpy road of like taking another yoga teacher training or feeling like you can't fill your classes or taking on too much on your schedule or wondering how we can, really feel contentment with our job as yoga teachers. And this is how the podcast was born. I wanted yoga teachers to have a place where they could connect to a supportive community, to ideas and information. And the main goal is that you feel like your questions get answered and you feel like you're a little bit inspired or you feel very supported each and every week here on the podcast. Returning listeners, thank you so much for being here again and for hanging out together. Before I dive in further, please note that you will hear in today's episode that we're giving 2 books away. And wow, this is a book draw that you want to get in on for sure. Well, let me clarify. Only if you want to cultivate some contentment, find more contentment, aka Santosha. All you have to do to win one of the 2 books is comment on our show notes page over at theconnectedyogateacher.com. And it'll be theconnectedyogateacher.com/377 for this episode. And just share your thoughts or questions about today's episode. You can listen to the first 10 minutes of our chat with Mary and leave a quick comment as you're listening. And then we're going to be doing a draw for 2 books. And once you leave a comment, we'll do a draw and we'll reach out to 2 winners. I love this part of my job, giving books away, especially when they are by amazing authors like Mary, our guest today. Now, before we talk to Mary, I have a couple of announcements and notes first. So first of all, huge thank you to OfferingTree, our sponsor, who powers today's episode. I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything. Bookings, payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. And we have a special podcast listener discount code for you over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon if you want to check it out. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals, and I am so happy to announce that you can continue to join this amazing membership, even though I am passing the torch of running the membership to someone else. In the past few podcast episodes, I've shared that I'm just feeling like it's time for a change. I'm feeling really drawn to be out in nature more, growing food, learning more about pollinator-friendly plants, and connecting others to nature. And I'm not even sure what that's going to look like when it all unfolds, but I know this is the right direction for me. And so the podcast is still happening. That's still a thing that I really want to stay connected to all of you through the podcast. And also, as of August the 1st, 2024, we have a new owner of Pelvic Health Professionals. And also, on top of this amazing news, I'm going to be in there a little bit, and we're going to do a call so that you can meet the new owner. And so if you want to jump in and learn the most up-to-date pelvic health information with a supportive community of yoga teachers, PTs, and other healthcare and movement professionals, join us over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. I'll share what topics we're covering later in today's episode and who our guest speakers are and what's coming up. And for now, let's just dive right in and get into today's interview. First of all, I want to share that today has felt like one of the heaviest days for a while. And I might share at the end of today's episode, I'm not sure yet if I even can articulate in a summarized way of like why that is. There was something that happened I probably can share with you, but just to say, like, there are heavy things happening for people all over the world. And right now, in the midst of like so many heavy and negative things that we are witnessing right now, it can feel challenging to remain positive and be content with ourselves and our lives. So, how do we cultivate contentment? Is that possible? Is it important? What are some strategies we can adopt, and how can they help us navigate the ups and downs of life? Mary Flaherty joins me on the podcast today to talk about all of this and more. Mary was on the podcast before with another book and another topic all about, how yoga works for so many different things. I'll link to that episode in our show notes. I love how Mary brings in the science when she comes to talk with us and also when she writes books. Mary has over 30 years of experience as a psychologist. She's a highly experienced university lecturer and curriculum developer. She's worked in Australia, Japan, Ireland, and the UK, and is also a researcher with published findings reported in Time magazine. Her specific fields of interest include positive psychology, sleep, stress, and anxiety management, meditation, mindfulness, and yoga. Mary has also been a yoga teacher for over 20 years. So in our conversation, you will learn more about Mary's background and why she entered into this space of studying contentment. She also talks about her new book, Keys to Contentment, From Science, Monks, and My Mother, sharing with us some practical tips about how to be happy and content. Mary explains some aspects of how the brain works that might help us when life is hard and highlights why being positive is so important. I especially loved when Mary talked about what she's learned from monks and her mother about contentment, and I can't wait for you to hear it too. So let's dive in. Let's fill up for a moment together, and I'll catch you on the outro, and I think I'll share. I think I'm feeling a little lighter already just thinking you all are going to have this episode. I'm going to listen to it again when it comes out. I think I need to, not myself talking, but the interview part with Mary. And I'm going to pull her book out again and really see, when times get heavy, what tools can we turn to? So let's dive in and have this conversation with Mary. Welcome back to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Mary. It is so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm so grateful. It's really my honor.
We had you on the podcast before talking about another book, and we're bringing you back to talk about, this is your second book, am I correct?
That's correct. And I'm very grateful. I think the two books really, Shannon, are kind of my two big passions in my life. One, yoga, and the other, well, they tie into one another, understanding how our minds work and how best to live a life. So they kind of are the two pathways of things that I've integrated into my daily life for pretty much since I'm conscious, since my early 20s.
And I have to tell our listeners who haven't ever looked at one of your books, like you have a real way of pulling in science, but also fun and images. And I just don't know anyone else who writes books like you. So I really hope that our listeners check out your book. So this new book is really all about contentment. Now, I have so many questions about like why you chose the title contentment instead of happiness. But before we get into all of this,
Mhm,
why don't you tell us what sparked you to write a book
mhm,
about contentment and specifically to talk about the science behind it?
mhm. Um, it was first of all a contentment. I decided to call it Keys to a Contented Life rather than to a Happy Life, because contentment really is the idea of internal balance. What they say in Pali in the Buddhist tradition, upekkha, which means that no matter what life throws at us, we can stay buoyant. And also, it's sustainable. Contentment is sustainable again through the storms of life. It endures in difficulty. Whereas happiness, which is, I mean, they do overlap, but happiness I think of more as something that's like an emotional reaction to something. It might imply that when difficulties appear, one might be less happy or disappointed. And also, it kind of, the word kind of carried a temporary um, meaning for me. Now, having said that, in the whole area of positive psychology, we talk a lot about happiness. So they are, they're very close brothers or sisters. But for me, contentment implied something that was more for the long haul, through all weather patterns of life. And why I wrote the book, I think it was having had a lifetime a career in psychology with a great interest. I mean, it's something that's my hobby anyway. Learning about neuroscience. I love the research of psychology, having had a lifelong meditation practice and having had the honor of meeting and doing retreats with monks and with yogis. And then the wisdom I realized as I got older, the profound wisdom of my mother, who was neither a scientist nor a yogi nor a meditator, that pulling these together in a way that people could relate to the strategies or the keys to help them to navigate life, I thought would be very useful. And also to put it in a way that's very digestible, that's not academic. So I actually gave a number of talks, like seminars, practical courses in Ireland and in Australia on the content of the book, and a number of people at the end of these courses asked me to write a book about it so they could pick it up anytime and pull out what they needed for that particular moment in their lives. So I think it was their encouragement that made me think, well, this could really help people, especially because I feel it's very digestible. I mean, with all the strategies and the keys are all scientifically based. A lot of them come from, again, my experience with meditation, with monks, with yoga, and the wisdom of my mother, sort of the age-old wisdom, that they're pretty simple. But like anything else in life, things that are simple are fine to read, but put them into practice is often a little bit more challenging. But I thought if it's in one book and digestible, then it gives people the opportunity, the platform.
Now, I'm so curious to hear how you decided to include your mom in this or kind of the backstory. I definitely want to get into like, what's the scientific recipe for contentment? Let's get into that in a minute. But what about, um, tell me how your mom comes into this and sort of how I'm guessing that she modeled this as you were growing up.
Well, my mom was a really wise lady. She wasn't very well educated in the formal sense of the word. But as I got older and as I learned more about psychology and more about yoga and meditation and Buddhism and the wisdom traditions, philosophy, I realized my mother, unbeknownst to herself, was not only a neuroscientist, she was a psychologist, she was a philosopher. She taught me so much. I'll give you one example. I actually opened the book with this story. I remember once when I was a little girl, in our yard, we had an old swing, and my friend was pushing me on the swing, and of course I flew off and I hit the side of a sink that was just in the side of the yard, and I bumped my head. And I remember still, I was probably 8 or 9, that moment where this was going to be a complete tragedy. I was just about to start crying when my mother saw me from the kitchen, and she called out and she said, "Mary, that's just beautiful. You fell exactly like a leprechaun falls. You were just a little leprechaun." And suddenly she reframed. Suddenly my mind went from being, this is a disaster, to, oh my goodness, I'm so proud. So these little things happened a lot in my life with my mom. And as I got older, I realized she was retraining me. She was reframing. So as my mind would turn towards the more interpreting a situation in a more positive way. So I really admired her, and she had all kinds of catchphrases. Another catchphrase she had, and again, which is so important to live a contented life, was she used to say, "Please yourself and you'll please everyone. Please yourself and you'll please everyone." And she'd say it all the time. And I remember when I was like in my early 20s and I wanted to go traveling and see the world and see countries like India and Japan, completely different cultures. Because she told me, when you travel, you realize that each culture has its own conditioning and that each of us is going to be different in different cultures. So it'll open your mind to understand a broader perspective. So in this way, again, I think she was like a narrative psychologist, because she knew that our lives are a biography. She wouldn't have put it in these terms, but the story that we tell ourselves, the conditioning that we have from wherever we come from, defines who we are. So when we meet people, for example, at a party, and we tell them a little bit of the story of our lives, we're the ones who choose the plot points of our lives in order to give an image of who we are. And my mother would always say, if it doesn't suit you, change it. So in this way, I think she was very wise. Later on in my life, I worked with prisoners and people when they had come out of prison, helping them to reconstruct their lives and really teaching them how, basis of narrative psychology, that the story they will tell people, because they can leave out bits of the story and put in bits, and nobody's telling any lies. It's simply how we reconstruct ourselves. So in this, I think my mother was really wise. Other ways, I think she was extraordinary. Another one of her catchphrases throughout my life was, "Life is short, so live it well, Mary. Life is short, so live it well." And I think this was very profound, in that we know that prioritizing things in our lives help us to be happier and more content and be truer to ourselves. A quote I love from Stephen Covey is, "The key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities." And I think is taking time to think about one's life and know it's short, it's finite, and prioritizing what's foundationally important to oneself is super important. In fact, when I was writing the book, Shannon, I worked out, if I live a sort of a good average lifespan for a woman in Western cultures, I have about 1,000 weeks left in my life. And when I looked at that, I thought, oh my God, if we were looking at time like we looked at money, I'd be using it really well and being very careful to follow my mother's instruction. Life is short, so live it well. Another aspect, just finally, on my mom, I could talk about her for hours. She was a wonderful woman. I remember once asking her, soon actually before she died, what was the most wonderful advice or best advice she ever got from her mother, so my grandmother. And she thought for a moment, and then she said, to be kind to everyone, kind to people you meet, kind to people in your thoughts, be kind. And now we know, of course, from science, that when we're kind, not only the giver and the recipient, but even a witness of kindness will experience a rush of oxytocin, a feel-good hormone. And it's extraordinarily good for our health, mental and physical, as well as our relationships, obviously. In fact, studies that have been done in British Columbia on anxious people who are suffering from anxiety, when they've been asked to consciously carry out 6 acts of kindness a week for 1 month, not so long. After a month, their positive mood increased, their social avoidance decreased, and they saw a marked decrease in their overall anxiety. So again, these little things, these nuggets by my mother, are backed up by science. Even if, from again coming back to the monks, the Dalai Lama famously says, "My religion is simple. My religion is kindness." So I think it's these and many other nuggets. I included my mom, and also to make the book a bit more soft, if that makes sense, to make it more personal, and kind of also, I suppose, to in a way to say thanks to her.
Oh my gosh, I love this. What's your mom's name, Mary?
Kitty, Kitty,
Kitty?
Kitty. Yeah, she was a
My
great woman.
gosh. I love
Yeah.
it so much. And I hope that we all like take this. If we didn't receive this kind of advice from a parent or someone who took care of us, I hope that we can take it in today. She sounds amazing. I love that she's saying, like, please yourself and then you'll please others. And kindness is really how we get there. So, what about when you started to really look at the science? What gets me excited about this is just you talking about this piece right now with the anxiety. I've been talking with a friend who, is feeling a lot of anxiety right now. And I'm definitely going to share this with her. Like, try this.
Great. Mhm.
What other scientific things have you seen to help with contentment?
Um, well, there's so many, but I'll just pick a few. I'll just focus on a few to answer your question, Shannon.
Sure. Because you wrote the book on all of them.
Yeah, it's 12 in all I've given.
Okay.
I tried to congest them, but I came up with 12. And they do overlap, obviously. And for somebody like your friend who maybe experienced anxiety, one of the super scientifically proven strategies, again and again, is social connections. Social connections. We are social beings, and forever, as far back as we can see, we benefit more when we are helping and have the help and interactions with other people. It's good for us physically, mentally. We have less stress related illnesses when we nurture our social connections. Now, some people might ask, and very rightly so, well, maybe which one is the egg and which one is the chicken? Is it because we have social connections that then we are mentally healthier and less anxious and physically healthier? Or is it the other way around? Now, there's a great study done in New Zealand over 20 years. So it's a long study on 22,000 people. And they found, from when they crunched all their data, that social connections are a better predictor of mental health than the other way around. So in other words, nurture those social connections because they really will help us to be more content, to be less anxious, to be happier. Something that listeners might ask, what about Facebook? What about interactions on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, in social media? Now, a University of Michigan study has a big one again, showed that the more Facebook, the more anxiety. Because, and I'm just going to mention this one briefly, because we tend to compare ourselves with others. And if we feel that other people, because let's face it, nobody puts, their bad days on Facebook. Here's a picture of me miserable somewhere awful. We put the good things. So we're cherry picking what we show other people. And when we look at Facebook and we compare our lives to people we think are having much happier lives, we can feel a little less. Now, having said that, that's just one study. The research on social connections through social media is nuanced. It all depends on how much social media, how it's used, whether the person is very lonely, is lacking in interactions, face-to-face or phone interactions, speaking to somebody. So it's nuanced. It's not black and white. But social connections is one super important strategy. Another, so listeners, go out there and pick up the phone and speak to somebody, send somebody a nice message, go meet somebody. Gratitude. Again and again, gratitude has been shown not only in the scientific world again, but in the whole area of Buddhist traditions. Gratitude changes us in a way that what we have is enough. So society, unfortunately, often is trying to encourage us to want more and more because that's the world that we live in. But gratitude makes what we have into being enough. And it helps us again mentally, physically. It helps us when we're grateful to have better relationships. It even helps in workplaces. Managers and leaders in companies who are grateful to their staff rather than pointing out the weaknesses, in other words, elevating the strengths, they get better productivity and less turnover of staff, and people are happier at work. There's a whole area in this area of organizational psychology called appreciative inquiry. And it's really looking at things to find what's good, being grateful. So something very simple that we can do on that is write a thank you letter to somebody and tell them why you're grateful to them. Or something that's often recommended by the positive psychologists is to write a gratitude diary. Actually make it a practice each night before you go to bed to write down what you're grateful for in your life or what went well today. So really focusing on the positive. Another way, apart from social connections, gratitude, is to create good habits, nurture good habits and to try and lose bad ones. Because once we make a habit, good or bad, our brains actually change. Once they're established, we have to use less neuronal activity, less neuronal networks to carry out the activity. So, for example, if somebody wants to have a daily yoga practice, then they need three things. They need a trigger or a cue, and that means pick a time of day, pick a place in your house, have a yoga mat, maybe have clothes that will trigger you to do the practice, a physical yoga practice. Then you have the routine. So the trigger is place, location, time. The routine is deciding what yoga you're going to do, maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, an hour, whatever. And finally, very important is the reward. Now, the reward at the beginning might have to be something external, like maybe your cup of coffee after the yoga practice or the chocolate or whatever. But eventually, the reward will be the practice in itself. And that's what we call an intrinsic reward. And an intrinsic reward is a much better way to keep a habit going in the long term. So again, to create good habits, have a trigger, a routine, and a reward, because the brain will respond to those that sequence. Another thing, of course, is that particularly breaking bad habits. I know myself, I was a coffee addict, and all well and good, except that drinking, I was like 4 or 5 cups a day. And I found my anxiety went up. Me personally, it just didn't suit me and I didn't sleep very well. And I had to break the habit. So when we are breaking bad habits, we can't just stop them. We have to replace them. So in my case, I replaced it with mint tea. Now, I have to say that obviously I didn't get the caffeine kick, but it had the other aspects. I had things like I'd have the mint tea in a nice cup. I'd try and meet a friend so that it had that comforting feeling that I would have when I'd have a coffee. And over time, with a couple of relapses, I did manage to kick that bad habit that was bad for me personally. So in breaking bad habits, it's important that we believe in it. It's important that we see that change is important. For me, I knew change was important because there are heart issues in my family, and I could feel my heart really race after having so much caffeine. And thirdly, very important, is to build support. Because I told all my friends that I no longer drink coffee, so they no longer asked me if I wanted a coffee, so they didn't tempt me. So it's important that we tell other people, also for making a good habit, it's important to tell other people, maybe as the example of having a daily yoga practice, maybe doing the yoga practice with a friend. So building support that way, so each can support the other. So apart from social connections, being grateful, having good habits in one's life. Another one that finally I'll mention that I feel is really, really important is sleep. Just coming back to my coffee addiction. Sleep is so important that if we live an 80-year lifespan on average, let's say, hopefully, we'll spend 26 of them asleep. I mean, that's an enormous chunk of our lives. And sleep is connected, listeners may be aware, to our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm orchestrates everything we do. When we're hungry, when our temperatures change, when our hormones fluctuate, and most importantly, our sleep. And it's synchronized by a master clock in our brains, which is influenced primarily by light. Light is super important. So anybody listening who is a shift worker or has to travel for work and has jet lag, they'll know that it throws their circadian rhythm out of sync, and it's really very, very difficult. On this topic, I might mention, because it's personally very important to me. In fact, I think that if I come back again, I'm coming back as a koala bear, because apparently koala bears sleep 18 hours a day. So I love sleep.
My gosh, that's amazing. 18 hours a day.
It's quite something. But I just want to share this personal story on sleep. I really suffer from seasonal affective disorder, SAD. And again, listeners who may not be familiar, it's I call it a condition, phenomenon, whatever, for people who live far from the equator, where in winter the hours of light are greatly reduced. And it can cause, it means that various neurotransmitters won't be released because there's not the light to release the serotonin and to change the cocktail of neurotransmitters that make us feel good. Now, not everybody obviously suffers from this, but I personally suffer quite badly from it. That in the winter I'd get really depressed and down. And I remember for 1 year, I had the great fortune of living in a cabin in the southwest of Ireland, where there was with no electricity. We just had candles, and we even made our own candles. We kept bees, made our own candles. We were really back to nature. But for that year, I remember noting I never suffered from seasonal affective disorder at all. But I slept in the winter. I would sleep up to 15 hours a night. I slept with the natural light. And in the summer, I would sleep about 4 to 5 hours a night. Again, in line with the natural light of the environment, because I didn't have artificial light. And I just thought, because we now live in a world that slightly our circadian rhythms are pretty much all out of sync, because we have electric light and we have gadgets that we use before we go to bed and whatnot, we are not working, our natural rhythm is not in line completely with natural light, and this can affect our sleep. So, and the importance of sleep, it's sleep is important for learning, for laying down memories, for improving our immunity, staving off anxiety, depression, reducing our risk of cancer. Even when we sleep, there's a cleaning process in the brain, which we now know is directly connected to staving off Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So sleep is super, super important in terms of our contentment and our health. So the take-home message from that last point on sleep is reduce light before you go to sleep. Brush your teeth in the dark. Try and not use your phone for the last hour or two before you go to sleep. To our brain, 10 minutes of light from your phone is the same as 1 hour being out in the light. So we want to let a hormone called melatonin begin to increase before we go to sleep, because that'll help us to sleep better. So it's something I'm passionate about, is sleep. So there are some of the scientifically proven strategies. And social connections, gratitude, super important. Get good sleep, and as much as possible, nurture good habits, because what we do each day becomes who we are.
This is amazing. Thank you so much, Mary. I feel like you've given us so much. We have some podcasts on habits. So if people would like some more on that, I'll make sure to link to them in the show notes. I just want to say, like, it has been so dark here this week because we're into the end of November, and where I live, it's like
Mm.
the sunlight goes away, and you've just explained exactly how it feels for me. And I used to fight the hibernation that
Mm.
is really natural. I used to fight it a lot. And when I started to get outside when it's light out,
Mm.
and exactly what you said, like shut my phone down earlier, which I have not been doing this month as much. So I've got a lot of like take home notes. I'm sure our listeners do as well. I'm popping in here for a moment, connected yoga teachers, to tell you about OfferingTree. So, yes, they sponsor the podcast, and that is bringing it to your ears today. But I also want to tell you that I use OfferingTree myself, and I'm so grateful that this company is steeped in yoga philosophy and the values that matter to me. I want to tell you a little inside information as well. Sinead, who works on our team here with the podcast, also works for OfferingTree. And she recently met up with the OfferingTree team in person for the first time ever. And when she got back from that meeting, the first thing she told me when she got home is how great the team is. And she was saying, like, I know we know this, Shannon, because we've been working with them for years. But Sinead just remarked how amazing they are in person and how real they are. They're their personalities in person as well as online. And so I find it really amazing that we can all work together and collaborate now through this online world, and sometimes go years before we meet up in person. So if you are building an online business where you're connecting with students around the world and you want things to be automated and simple, make sure to check out OfferingTree. This is a company that cares about community and social justice, and they've also created the most user-friendly booking, payment, and website software that I know of. And I'm laughing because, oh my goodness, I've tried so many. And it's also the best priced option as well. So I know this is important to yoga teachers and studios, so check it out. We have a discount code for you, and that's at offeringtree.com/Shannon. Okay, let's get back into our conversation today with Mary. I have a question. You talked about gratitude and being positive, and I want to check in here because, well, a few things. So this week, I was doing a live and I was talking about, watching the news and speaking up for Palestinian people who are being harmed right now, and how it can be really overwhelming and it's hard to find contentment. So someone was asking, how do we find Santosha right now? And I've also seen, not just right now in this moment, but seen through the years, like, um, the wellness industry has given us this message, like, just think positive thoughts. Don't look at the news. Don't talk about bad things. And that doesn't feel okay for me. So can you distinguish when we're talking about like being
Mhm.
positive and being grateful, as well
Mhm.
as holding space for what's happening for others around us? What does that look
Mhm.
like?
Um, I absolutely. I think something that sometimes the whole positive psychology movement, it's almost like it's called toxic positivity. Is some things in life are just really, really hard. And as you just said, the situation for Palestinians is horrific. And I think what we need to do really is to acknowledge that life is difficult and that there is an awful lot of sadness and an awful lot of cruelty, and not acknowledging it belittles it. And even at a micro level, if we have friends that are going through difficult times, and we know ourselves when we go through difficult times, if somebody says to us, it'll be for the better in the long run, that doesn't help. It doesn't help to say that the universe will provide. That doesn't help. What we need to do is to listen, to acknowledge that there is a lot of sadness and a lot of difficulty there. And acknowledge it, and stay with the feeling of sadness until it passes. Because denying the fact that we have these feelings isn't good for anybody, especially for ourselves. One way that we can try to alleviate at a micro level is understanding that the more we can nurture forgiveness in our own lives, and at a macro level, the more we can spread the kindness broadly, and try as much as possible to reduce the idea of the other, us and them, as much as possible, to embrace and to give care and give acceptance and forgiveness, even in our own lives. If there's people in our own lives that are bothering us, maybe a neighbor or whatever, as much as possible, try to, it's a cliche, but try to walk a moment in their shoes, try and see where they're coming from. Doesn't mean that you want to become friends or anything like that, but try and see where it's coming from, and send empathy and care and kindness. Because I think the only way we can counteract, and again, this is personal opinion, but also from traditions of yoga, from the traditions of Buddhism, the only way we can counteract cruelty is not with cruelty, it's with care. The more we can care and open our space and allow the sadness through, but also to allow the forgiveness.
This is amazing. I think it's so, I've been really looking at how I can continue to stay connected to other people, especially when it feels like my views are different or my values are different. But I think that's a practice for me anyway, personally, especially right now. So sorry, what were you going to say, Mary?
Yeah, no, for all of us, absolutely. In fact, just following on from what you just mentioned, Shannon, there's again, becoming aware of how our brain works can be helpful, but there is a bias. Our brains have cognitive biases, and these are kind of mental shortcuts, and we navigate our world with these, and they're really important. They're very hard to eliminate, but I think it's very important to become aware of them. And one of them, just on this topic, is called the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a fancy word of saying we basically favor or search or recall what supports our preconceived beliefs. So, for example, could be about climate change. We'll only read or get feeds of that which supports what we believe, either which way, or vaccination or prejudices or whatever it might be, or maybe respecting only one particular yoga tradition, whatever it might be. We will search out and recall what supports our belief. And it can really help to almost imagine we have another belief, the opposite. So we can listen, keep an open mind, consider all the evidence, and have empathy for the belief that is absolutely the opposite to our own. It's really going to play with our brains, because these biases are so ingrained in our minds. Our thoughts have gone through this pathway so often. It's our belief, and it can help to kind of almost open and create space, and it can soften. We can almost feel it softening physically when we can kind of try to not hang on so tightly to our own confirmation bias. But it's the way the brain works. We can't help having these wonderful brains that do all kinds of strange things for us.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I spoke on another podcast of how there were a few podcast listeners who told me like, okay, Shannon, can I tell you I have a different view than you on this? And I reached out and was like, can we have a phone conversation? Because I want to make sure that I'm really listening to understand, and
Right.
which gets so hard sometimes
It gets.
in my brain, the way it works. I love that you brought this up, this confirmation bias, and how I do this. I'm like, yes, yes, this person is saying, and this makes complete sense to me. I was listening to a podcast today and I love this podcast. It's called Canada Land. I love how they do such good journalism. They really pick things apart. They often are going against the grain, it feels like. And today, so often I listen to episodes and I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Today it was going against the grain for my views. And I was like, okay,
Right.
this is important that I listen right now. I could have just shut it off and been like, nope.
Good on you. That's great. That's great. I'll check that podcast out. Thank you for telling me. But
And
that's great.
and I mean, I wouldn't go like, if it was somebody saying, "Oh no, my belief is like to harm this other person, and now you have to believe that." I want to be clear about that. But this podcast was really talking about like, let's view it. The harm is
Mhm,
over here, and let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at
mhm.
how this could be harmful. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for bringing this in.
That's great. That's great. Fabulous.
Um, so let me bring an example in. A few years ago, I had a yoga student coming to my class who was dealing with depression and anxiety and had recently divorced their partner, was dealing with like society's idea that, you get married, you have your kids, you
Mm,
ride off into the sunset together.
mhm,
And so there was a lot of grief there as well.
mhm,
And so when this yoga student shared, here's how I'm feeling.
mhm,
Um, how do we help our yoga students? Well, first of all, let me just say I'm also a big fan of saying like, are you going to therapy? Like
mhm,
having a
mhm.
referral out. But like tell us what's our role then as a yoga teacher when our students come to us and they tell us like about the struggles they're facing in life.
Mhm, mhm. Um, First of all, I think it's just great that she trusted you and that you gave her that space to share something so personal. It's a great indication of you, Shannon, I think, because sharing these things that, as you say, society has a recipe for what a good life looks like. And if somebody's life doesn't follow that pattern or that recipe, it can be very disappointing, obviously, and at many levels, both in terms of one's own response, but also a fear of what other people will think. So that could be hard. Um, I think in the yoga tradition, the eight limbs of yoga, the ethical part, right through the breathing, through to the awareness, all the way through to samadhi, there's so many important things that we can share with students. But in the situation that you just mentioned, I think giving the space to let the student talk and to really listen to the person without any judgment whatsoever, complete acceptance and compassion um, are a great gift. Because, and not sort of say maybe you could try this, try that. Just let the person reveal their emotions and where they are right then, is a wonderful. They may not get that opportunity elsewhere because very often friends tend to tell us what they think is best for us and whatnot, and sometimes we just need to let the space be there in a non-judgmental, accepting way. In terms of the yoga itself, the practice, I think there's great things we can do in a practice, like rituals, and maybe even recommend rituals for the person, for the student, where um, she can celebrate things that were in her marriage. Okay, it may be finished now, but that doesn't mean it was a failure, because there would be many things to appreciate that were in the marriage while they were married. Um, Obviously, in the yoga practice. Asanas, the postures, help us to be aware of our body, our thoughts, our breathing. And doing a yoga practice, particularly perhaps encouraging the student to do a yoga practice at home by herself, as a gift to herself, to create space and a platform where she's nurturing herself, but also she's having time and space through her breathing and through the sensations of her body to cultivate observing her internal dialogue without finding answers, just letting it be. And probably that, I think, would be the biggest gift, is acceptance, to encourage acceptance of where she's at and where her life is and how it is, and embracing it. And I often think, actually, I had a friend, I have a few friends, in fact, who told me that when I was doing the research for the other book, who shared with me that going through hard times, I can think of two in particular. One who had a grief situation because her husband had died, another one who had just gone through a divorce. And they both told me that their yoga practice, now they were established yoga practitioners, I should mention, but they found that going to the mat every morning gave them a space to cry while they were on their own, and just let the emotions run their pathway. So I think yoga is a wonderful, wonderful tool, especially when life offers us very challenging circumstances.
What I love about this over and over again is that you're not telling us to rush in and fix something. You're not telling someone, okay, I realize you feel bad and let's hurry up and feel happy.
Mm.
And I think that is the biggest gift. I know I have felt it from friends, definitely also my therapist.
Mm-hmm. I
There
think
are
there's
certain people in our lives who are comfortable with sitting in these like
yeah.
tough emotions. Sorry, you were going to say something, Mary.
I was going to say the exact same. Out of kindness, I really think it's out of kindness. We all know people who want to fix everything, and some things are unfixable. And acceptance is the real key. Um, and I think when we are in situations which are very challenging, like the student you mentioned, the last thing they want to hear, and it's not going to be helpful, is somebody who wants to try and fix it immediately, because it's much more complex. You know, it's not like fixing your car or fixing the TV or whatever. Emotions have to be allowed to run their course. And like you say, I think it's just being with them, truly listening, non-judgmental acceptance and forgiveness of oneself and others. And care, self-care is very important.
That's beautiful. I love this whole idea of a morning yoga practice and someone sharing with you like that was the time to cry and really
Mm.
feel those things. That's a really beautiful story. What
Mm.
else? Like, how else were you learning about how the practice of yoga, but also you learned from monks and your mother? Is there
Mhm.
anything else that you feel like you hope people know about to lead a more content life?
Mhm. Um, it's a great question, and I'm going to answer it following on exactly from what we were just talking about from monks. I should mention, I've had the great fortune, Shannon, of being involved with monks and the whole Buddhist tradition throughout my life. Um, I lived in Japan in the 80s. I was a student and in psychology, and one of my professors was studying. This was back in the 80s, before John Kabat-Zinn or any of the other research was done on meditation. But this particular professor was studying how brain waves of Zen monks changed over the periods of which they were meditating. So he'd look at monks who were meditating for 5 years and 10 years and 20 years and so on. So he sent me off to a Zen monastery in the hills in Japan to meditate, my first experience. And from that time, I have had the fortune of doing lots of meditation retreats, what are called Vipassana 10-day silent retreats, more recently in the Thai forest tradition with a wonderful monk, Ajahn Brahm, who's got great podcasts. And because of my both interest in the whole tradition, both from yoga and from Buddhism, but also from my personal experience, I learned a lot. So I'm going to give you a few things. One is that the monks and the Buddhist tradition really acknowledge that life is hard. In fact, there's even a word. There's a word that they use. It's called dukkha. And dukkha is a Pali word which roughly translates as unsatisfactory. And that in our lives, there'll always be a little bit of dukkha hanging around, no matter what we do. The fewer problems we have, it doesn't mean that we're going to be satisfied. It just means that we lower the threshold of what's a problem. Now, it's again how our brains work. Even experiments have been done in psychology. I can't remember where the experiment was done, but they had participants look at pictures of faces that were threatening and not threatening, and they were asked to pick out the threatening faces. And then, a sleight of hand by the experimenters, they reduced the ratio of faces that were threatening. So now there was more non-threatening faces, but the participants upped the bar, and even faces that didn't look threatening, now they thought they were threatening. So in other words, even when we go on our holidays to the Canaries or wherever, for the first few days all is fine, and then we begin to think, oh well, the bed sheets in the hotel are not that great, or we buy a new house and the kitchen is great at the beginning, and then after a while, oh, I think I need a new sideboard. We are automatically always going to find some problem, because when they disappear, we just lower the threshold. In fact, there's a great quote from Oscar Wilde. He said, there's two tragedies in life: not getting what you want and getting what you want. So I love that. So that, I think that's a really good thing to know, that, and we know this now from neuropsychology, that our brains, they basically, we're not wired for happiness. There'll always be weather systems going through. But the thing is to stay with them, watch them, don't get too involved, watch the anger going through. Think of it like a visitor. Not that I'm angry, don't take it on. Anger is passing through. It'll always find a host. Anger does. So when we watch it passing through, we can somehow distance ourselves from it, not get too involved, if that makes sense. So that's one thing I think is really important for a contented life, to know that it's natural, this dukkha, dissatisfaction. Another great concept, I think, from monks and the tradition of Buddhism is that change is inevitable. And they even have a word again for this, anicca, which means change, that our lives are constantly changing, and that we have to live with uncertainty, even though we love to. Uncertainty is very stressful for us. We don't like it. But it's inevitable. But another way we can reframe this is that with the uncertainty of life, which is inevitable, we can enjoy the adventure of life. If we knew exactly how the movie was going to finish and pan out, we wouldn't even bother watching it. So knowing that the uncertainty of life is a part of what it is, and again, accepting it, it's better to adapt than to complain, to go with the flow. And thirdly, and most importantly, in order to really come to terms with this dukkha, dissatisfaction, anicca, constant change and uncertainty, is nurturing our awareness. Nurturing our awareness so we become an observer of ourselves in a non-critical way. Now, awareness is super important. In fact, we really navigate our world by selective attention. And where we put our attention, and it's a limited resource, is really important. And we often don't notice things at all in our environment because we're focused on one particular thing, because that's where we've put our attention. But try to nurture our awareness in a broader sense can really help us to be more content. And we can do that by doing things slower, like having a shower and really feeling the water on our bodies. When we eat a meal, really thinking about where each part of the meal, where the food was grown, how it was delivered to the shop that we bought it, what was involved in producing the meal in front of us. So slowing down and really broadening our awareness. And probably one of the best ways to broaden our awareness, and is the foundation of pretty much all the Buddhist traditions, is meditation. We can call it mindfulness or meditation. And when it started out, obviously, as a monistic system, which had the lofty purpose of liberation and enlightenment. But now it's used a lot in therapy. It's used in workplaces to increase productivity. It's a word that's bandied around a lot, mindfulness or meditation. But meditation really is the full awareness of the present moment without any judgment, total acceptance. And the thing is, our brains love to travel. Our brains love to go back into the past and then go into the imaginary future, because that's the way they're built. So we almost have to train them to be aware of the present, because there will never be any other time but now. Because in 2 weeks' time, it'll be now then as well, even though we might worry about something that's going to happen in 2 weeks' time. It'll be now then. But meditation, profoundly important. It's so important for our health, our mental health. It not only decreases anxiety, it improves our memory, cognitive flexibility. It makes our amygdala calmer, the part of our brain that's the emotional brain. It helps us to sleep at all kinds of wonderful findings, again, from science, of how mindfulness can help us to live a better life. And when we meditate, we really are focusing on the internal. I shouldn't say focusing, we're watching the internal dialogue. Actually, there's a beautiful metaphor in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition where they encourage us to look at our thoughts, because thoughts will keep coming. Anybody who's meditated knows that minds think. That's what they do. The thoughts will keep coming. But to look at those thoughts, the Tibetan tradition say, look at those thoughts as if you were an old person sitting in a playground, and the thoughts are the children running around. And what we do when we look at children running around, they're fighting with one another, they're playing, whatever. We treat all of it with compassion and tenderness. So just let them be, let those children, let those thoughts be. And as we let them be, they'll calm down. If we try and control them, and we try and control our thoughts, they'll resist even more. And it's really going against the grain of, again, wanting to control, wanting certainty. It's letting it be. And to be honest, this whole tradition of watching the thoughts is what we now use, and has been really shown to be an evidence-based practice in therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, where we watch our thoughts, and then if they're not serving us, we challenge them and replace them with other thoughts. So it's pretty much a parallel of what the monks have been teaching for centuries. In fact, just on this topic of what we can learn from monks, I want to share a quote from the Buddha, which is beautiful. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. How could I say it better? So really, it's being aware of how our brains work and being kind and caring to the chaos that can often be there.
This is really something. I love it so much. I was thinking of when you were talking of different ways of, slowing it down even when we were eating. I was thinking about how much I gain from walking outside. And it's
Mhm.
because I love to really notice what's going on, like the tiniest little details. Like yesterday, I noticed the group that I was walking with, everyone's just kind of walking to get the walk over with. And I'm looking at like how the ice has formed on some different little branches.
I love it.
I'm like captivated, and that's all I'm looking for then is like how the ice has caught there. And I kind of feel like it's almost like I call it golden retriever energy out on a walking trail. Like when I'm like, ooh, look at this. Ooh, look at this over here. Like
Beautiful.
dogs do it when they're walking all the time.
It's really savoring the joys.
Yeah.
It's savoring. We might call them small things, but they're not, because watching the ice on a tree is something miraculous. And I think really you've really captured that there, Shannon, that savoring those little things help us to be in the now. And when we're in the now, when we're in the present, is when we're most content. And by savoring those joys out on a nature walk are just fabulous ways to really calm the mind. Fabulous.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I love that you've given us different ways to do this also. Oh, I cannot wait until our readers our listeners read your book and bring some of this into their own life, bring some of it into their own practice, and then share it out into the world. It's pretty exciting if we can think, okay, here's a way to feel more content and to kind of spread that around the world. Anything
Mhm.
else? Like, first of all, I guess the main thing is, where do our listeners find you and this book?
The book is available in all Amazon stores, and it's available in Kindle format and in paperback, and it's also available in Audible and in iTunes, because I read the book myself, so it has my Irish accent, for better or worse. So it's in those various platforms, so Audible and in Amazon.
Oh, that's so exciting that it's on Audible. I love that.
Well, more and more, I'm finding people asked me if I do it on Audible because they found that they just enjoy listening to books more. So, and I have to say, I love listening to podcasts and books myself. So I thought, well, I should practice what I preach. And Also, I'm available on Instagram at Mary Does Yoga.
Okay. Thank you so much for this, Mary. And is there anything that you'd say, like if one of our listeners is listening today thinking, I feel very far from contentment, what's one tiny thing that they might try?
That's a great question. I'm just going to share a very short little story in order to answer this question of a friend of mine who told me this story when his son was a child. He said one time to his son, because he wanted to check if his son was an optimist or a pessimist, and he said, "Now, what would you say if I gave you a glass half full of juice?" And the little boy thought for a moment, and he said, "Thank you." I thought, that's perfect. So I'd say the one thing that I would say is gratitude. That if there was one take home message, the more we can nurture gratitude and acceptance that everything is all right, and that it's a miracle to be here, the more we can stave off those storms in the mind.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you for your time today. And thank you for this book.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much, and I'm so grateful.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for this, Mary. Also, a huge thank you for during the interview when I kind of just threw it out there to you because we were talking, was it near the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024 when we recorded this? It's quite a while back. And I just threw out there like to be watching what's happening right now with Palestine. And thank you so much, Mary, for not missing a beat and to really dig into how we can counter cruelty. I love how you said that we can counter it not with more cruelty, but with care and with forgiveness. You even talked about like if we have someone in our life that's bothering us, maybe it's a neighbor or something, to take a moment and think about what it's like to walk in their shoes. And I think this is one thing that I've learned through this podcast, being a yoga teacher, working with many people throughout the years, also traveling, is to really take some time to get to hear people's story and connect with them and really think about what is it like to be this person. So I'm going to practice that for sure. Connected yoga teachers, I would love to hear from you about this episode. And as a bonus, if you leave a comment on our show notes page, as I said, you could win one of the 2 books that we're doing a draw for. and shipping out to you. So all you do is head on over to theconnectedyogateacher.com/377 and leave a comment, a question, anything about today's episode. And that automatically enters you in the draw for one of Mary's books. Thank you to all of the Connected Yoga Teacher listeners who took the time to share last week's podcast episode, the one that we did with Muna Shakur. It means so much because we realized when we tagged Muna on Instagram, we weren't hitting the same engagement. And I couldn't even post the story actually about the podcast because Muna is being very censored on Instagram, which is like I got to see it in real time, the difference of our reach of those posts and not even being able to post. And so I reached out to some of our regular podcast listeners. Many of you shared this episode. I know many of you listened and reached out to me and told me how great it was to listen to this conversation. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and have a listen for sure. It is really something to hear from Muna, who's been educating about collective care and educating about what it's like for her family in Palestine right now, occupied Palestine, and what her experience is watching what we're witnessing. The Lancet just came out with a report. If you haven't seen that, it hasn't been shared by a lot of mainstream media and news that I follow. They came out with a number of civilian deaths, and that was around 186,000 people in occupied Palestine. And that puts the number way up higher than we were previously being told. And so this is a reputable, medical journal, and it's important that we listen to healthcare experts, humanitarian aid workers, people who are on the ground working right now to help people. And that's super heavy for anyone who is watching what's happening around the world. And I did say that I might share also what was going on with me and what was feeling heavy. Before I do that, let me tell you some exciting news, and then I'll gather my courage to share a little bit here. So our pelvic health professional live calls that are coming up. We did one in June that I want you to have a listen to, especially if you have any yoga students who are working with other movement professionals or healthcare providers, or maybe this is even you right now, that do not understand how BMI is harmful and inaccurate and completely out of date. Dr. Lisa Folden came in to talk with us about weight-inclusive fitness and wellness care. I love this call so much. One thing that Dr. Lisa talked about is how healthy people can be when they are, quote unquote, showing up as obese. So our BMI has nothing to do with our health. And I love how she brings so much science to this call, so much information that's out there, and talks to us about why we still have these outdated ideas in the health and wellness spaces. So we did that call back in June. The replay is ready for you. And then on July the 15th, we did a call about anxiety, sleep issues in perimenopause with Anne-Marie McQueen. That one you can get the replay for as well. As I'm recording this for you, we haven't done the call, but by the time this episode gets to you, that call will be ready, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. We've had a lot of questions about anxiety and sleep issues and perimenopause and menopause, so I'm excited that our members get to learn from Anne-Marie McQueen. Then at the end of July, we are doing a call celebrating this new era of pelvic health professionals. We're going to introduce the new owner. We're also going to talk about a really big gift that I'm sharing with all members. I'm not telling you what it is. It's a really special gift. So if you're already a member of Pelvic Health Professionals, it's coming at you, and I cannot wait. It's really exciting, actually. I want to share right now. That's the way I am when I have something that is like a gift. But if you are interested in checking this out, even if you want to join for a month and check it out, you can join in, and you can access all of the calls that we've done for the last 5 years with pelvic health experts from around the world. It's an amazing wealth of knowledge if you work with people who have a pelvis. So head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com to join. Alrighty, I said that I would try and share something heavy that happened, and I'm going to do this in the most respectful way because it's pretty fresh. But I will just say that I was wearing a t-shirt. Let me check who it was made by, actually. Let me give credit to the artist. Okay, I found the artist's name. So it's Ashley Oliver over at Yoga and Mahogany on Instagram. I ordered a t-shirt a long time ago. I also have a sticker on my computer, and it's really simple. It's just a plain shirt with words, and it says anti-diet, anti-racism, anti-misogyny, anti-transphobia, yogi. And I was wearing this t-shirt last night when my daughter and I got home, and someone had stopped by our house and read my shirt and immediately was offended and wanted to proceed to explain to me how I did not have things correct. And these are the moments where I feel like these are the hard conversations I'm in our small community where I live here. There are trans kids, there are non-binary kids, there are gay kids. And I'm a mom, and I feel like I do these things for, I want to use my privilege and my time in these conversations. If it could shift something in any way to make it safer for other people. And there was just this moment in the conversation where this person probably realized that I'm not listening. And this person is a man. And he made some very threatening comment of like how to make me deprogrammed and basically how to change my mind in a threatening way. What he said was to another person standing there, you have a basement, we could deprogram her. We could lock her up for a bit. And I want to tell you that in this moment, I did not feel the fear. I just said very strongly, this is not helping your case. This is not helping me to feel like white men have my safety in mind. And I know that he was trying to play it off as a joke, but it isn't funny. It isn't funny to talk about trying to silence someone. And I want to tell you that if you are someone who is speaking up for social justice and you are privileged like me, all I can think about today is the people who don't hold the same level of privilege as me. If I can walk around and make the choice to wear my shirt or not, it's very different than if someone like a young kid in my community is walking around as a trans person and might be attacked for who they are. And so this person ended the conversation kind of by saying, you live in this fairy tale world, Shannon. Things aren't going to change. And to that, I knew at the core of me, I said, I've come to this place where I am not expecting that everything is going to change just because I want it to. I am speaking up for equality for all humans, and I will continue to do that until my last breath is out of my body, because that's for me, so that I can sleep at night, because that's the future that I want for my children, for all the children, for all the people. And, there were moments in the conversation where we found neutral ground, where we could agree on things. And also I'm walking away today feeling like there's a lot of work to do out there. And so if you are someone who can do that work, even if it's as simple as wearing the shirt that starts the conversation. And I'll tell you, my daughter said to me today, I don't even notice what that shirt says anymore because you wear it a lot. And I mostly get compliments on that shirt. I know that the answer is not just to avoid these hard conversations and wearing the shirt that speaks up for minorities. I know that's not the answer. And so I just invite you, if you have the capacity and the strength and the time, and you can do it in a way where you can kind of hold your ground and you feel okay doing it, have these tough conversations and also use what Mary said and really come in with like wondering, where is this person coming from? Like, where is this really coming from? And for this person who confronted me, they're coming from a place of misunderstanding or ignorance and fear. There was a lot of fear in the statements that they were sharing, fear of like things changing in our country and Canada and holding on to white privilege for men that is maybe slipping away. Maybe. I mean, it's still really prevalent, but I feel like that's where the fear was coming from. So anyway, sharing a super vulnerable conversation. I am certain that this person in my community doesn't listen to my podcast. If he does, well, there it is. I've shared it. It didn't feel great. Also, if you are a man listening to this podcast, please support the women around you when they are feeling like they're in a situation where they're starting to get some pushback for speaking up. It really does make a difference. And support each other. I'm not just saying men, but also women as well. Anyone. Support the people that are helping people that are, really doing the work, speaking up for human rights. And collectively, we can do that and we can make a big difference. So there we go. A heavy day, but I am really excited that tomorrow I have this hike planned with friends. We're going to go hiking and completely nerd out about plants and nature. And I'll try and take some pictures and share them on my Instagram. And I'm just really excited that I get to be outside. That's the one place where I really feel connected and can come back to grounding and center. So if you can get outside or find, a little time for some yoga or breath or something, or maybe get Mary's book and read up about contentment. I would love to hear if you are finding that for yourself. Yeah. Okay. Thank you to our amazing team over here, Suzanne, Crunch, Sinead, for all the work you do in this world and for making today's podcast possible. Thank you also, dear listener, for being here all the way to the end, to my long stories. You make this podcast possible. And as usual, I'm going to close out our episode with a question, not only for you, but also for me. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?